Today I show you how to create a section like this one in HTML and CSS. And this section is also 100% responsive, which means it will look good on pretty much every device and even on mobile. So let's go. So let's go inside of our main section and let's create a div wrapper in here. And let's say this div wrapper has the class of padding section, and we're going to create this class. Padding section is basically the padding we want to have on the top and the bottom. So we're going to say padding section is equal to padding top of maybe 80 pixels and a padding bottom of 80 pixels. And now we're going to add padding section to this div, and now we should have this padding at the bottom basically. So now let's add an h2 right here, and that h2 could say basically anything. It could say what you get, for example. So now we have this h2. Let's give this h2 also a class that increases the font size, and we already have this class right here that says font large or font XL, so we can choose which one we take, but I think font size of 40 pixels should be alright. So I'm going to give this h2 a class of font LG. And now we have this effect basically. Let's keep going by using the class center, I think, which will align the text inside of the center. So we're going to use this class as well. And now we have this text standard right here. So now we can start to style our different cards, if you want to say so, or our different modals, whatever you want to call them. So let's go and create a div with the class of modal, for example. And inside of this modal, we want to have an icon. On the top, we want to have a heading, for example, and then we want to have a short paragraph. So let's start by using some icons, for example. And I have some icons right here, which are basically SVG files. And in our case, we have this responsive SVG, Rocket SVG, SEO SVG, and YouTube SVG. And the best way, again, to add an SVG, or the most efficient way, would be to open with text editor and then just copy and paste this SVG in here, and then you would have this effect. You could obviously adjust the size by going into the width and height properties, for example, but I think this is a lot of code and it will get kind of weird or kind of hard to find the code we are looking for. So I'm going to do way that is probably not as efficient, but it will keep our code clean just for the purpose of this demo, so you understand how everything works. So yeah, let's go inside of our image folder, and let's say we want to get we could, for example, say let's get our responsive.svg, and we are going to save this. Now we have this SVG right here, and we can give it the class of SVG minus icon, for example. So we'll have this SVG icon. We're going inside of our style sheet and we create this class by saying dot SVG icon. This SVG icon will have a width of maybe 40 pixels. We can adjust that one later on, obviously. So maybe we are going to say, let's go with 50. And the next thing we want to have right below our image is an H3, for example, that says responsive design. And right below this responsive design, we probably want to have a paragraph with, for example, 30 words. We're going to save that one, and now everything looks like this. Obviously, it doesn't look perfect, but we can change that by now saying that we want to use for our modal, we want to use flex. And now we also want to change flex direction. We obviously have flex right here, which just sets our container to display flex. And now we can also justify or we can flex direction column, for example. Well, flex column is probably a shorter name. So let's use flex column for the class name, and let's say we want to have a flex direction of column. Like so. Now we are going to take this flex direction, we'll place it replace it right next to flex, and we're going to save. So now we have flex direction of column. Let's now use text center. So we're going to remove text, and now we have center right here. So now we want to align our items in the center on the secondary axis, which is the row right now. So we're going to use align items of center. So I think it's align center. So yeah, we have item center, which basically aligns our items to the center. So we're going to copy and paste that class in here. And now we have our items aligned to the center. So obviously it looks completely terrible, but we're going to fix that in a second by using another wrapper for this div, basically for this modal. And we say that this is the modal minus container. And inside of this modal container, we want to have 4 modals basically, but I'm going to start with 3 because we'll delete some of them anyways. So let's now keep going by using another class right next to the modal container, which is the class of grid. We need to define this class obviously, so we are going to go down and we say that we want to define a class grid that sets the display to grid. So now we basically have this design right here, and now I want to use .grid auto, which is a class I'll define, and I want to say grid template columns. I want to use repeat auto fit min max 250 pixels and 1fr function, and I'm going to use grid auto right behind grid, and this will make our design responsive. And if you can take a look at this, you'll see once we minimize the content, once it reaches a width of below 250 pixels, it will just jump down. And by doing so, we now have this responsive design basically. So this line basically says repeat as many columns as you need, and once you reach a width of 250 pixels, just go to the next line, and this makes our layout responsive without having to define media query. So I really love grid, and I can recommend everyone to use grid if you want responsive design with minimal effort. And 1fr just means if you have space, just take the space that is available to you. The next thing I want to do is maybe use a gap of 3, for example. So now we also have a gap. We can take a look if we also have another gap. So we have gap 1, gap 3, but I think 40 pixels is okay for now. So we're going with that design. So right now I would also like to have our content take up 80% of the width of the screen and be centered, but I don't want it to take up all the available space, like 100%, because it's like looks pretty bad to me. So the next thing we are going to do, we have this w minus 80 class, which will say take 80% of the width. So we're going to use that one, and we'll use that one for our modal container as well, I think, like so. And now I will take another div, which will basically wrap this div once again. So I think I have to take all of those divs, and now I create another div, and inside of this div I will use a flex box to center our item. So I'm going to use class flex, and I say justify center, and now we'll take this container that has a width of 80% and we center this container in the middle of our page like so. And as you can see, this really starts to look pretty good in my opinion. So the next thing we want to have is a margin right here. So we are going to go right below our h2, and we are going to say let's use mt of 2, for example. We might have to define another margin, and I think we have to, so we're going to go mt, and let's say we want to have mt of 4, for example, which would equal a margin top of 40 pixels. So let's say mt4, 40 pixels of margin to the top. We're going to save the document, and this is what it looks like. Looks a little bit better, but maybe I'm actually even going to try mt8 to see how this looks. And I somehow think that this looks actually even better to me, but yeah, obviously this is something that comes down to preference. Next up, I would really like to center the content, or I would like to center the paragraphs. So I'm going to add the class center right here. And now you can see our text is basically centered, and I'm going to do the same for the other two classes. Well, I'm actually going to leave them and copy and paste them in later, but I think this looks pretty good. So let's style this container for now. Let's say we want to have a slightly bigger margin right above our responsive design header. So we're going to go here, say class mt, we can for example use mt for, which we've just defined right now, and this looks actually a little bit better to me. Now for the paragraph, we're going to use the class of MT2, for example. So now we have some margin here as well, but I think maybe we are going to go with MT1. So we need to define this class, right? Okay, we have this class twice, so I'm going to remove this MT2 and going to say this MT1, and I say that this one has a margin top of 10 pixels. So now we have this design basically. Next up, I think the heading should be slightly bigger, so I'm going to see what kind of fonts we've already defined by taking a look, and let's say we want to have font medium for that one, and let's say we are going to go with 20 pixels. And now we say that our heading right here has a font MD for medium. So now we have this design basically, and to me this looks pretty cool already. So I'm now going to go and I remove the other divs by doing so, and now I'll take the div that we already have, and I'm actually even going to use a comment to keep track of what is basically what. I'm going to have this modal comment here to separate my sections, and now I'm going to copy this entire section and I'm going to paste it in 3 more times, and now we have this design basically. Obviously it's pretty easy to just replace these images right now. We could, for example, say that we want to have, instead of responsive design for the second one, we want to have performance, then we want to have SEO, and then we want to have whatever, cheap prices, for example. And now we can, for example, say for the second image, let's take /rocket, for example. Then for the third one, we're going to take /SEO, and for the last one, we're going to use / let's just go with the performance one, which doesn't make sense, but yeah. And as you can see, this is basically the look we can get from this icon section if you want to generate it yourself. And as you can see, it's obviously also 100% responsive.